Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning on student self-harm, how to spot the signs and what to do. My name is Amanda McCardle and I'm campaign manager for Walk On My Shoes. For anyone that isn't familiar with Walk On My Shoes or WIMS, it is a mental health awareness and education campaign of St. Patrick's Mental Health Services. You're all very welcome here today. I hope everyone can hear me and see me okay. I'm sure it's fine. If you're not familiar, this webinar this morning is part of a month-long programme of online wellbeing events that we're running at the moment called WIMS Live or Walk On My Shoes Live. To see the full schedule of upcoming webinars, podcasts or wellbeing sessions, you can visit walkonmyshoes.ie. So we're going to be joined very soon by our speakers, who I'm going to introduce very briefly now. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Susan Healy. Dr. Susan Healy is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist in St. Patrick's Mental Health Services, and Susan is going to talk to us about understanding self-harm and what is self-harm. And then we're going to be joined by Susan Raftery, who is a regional manager in Pieta House, and Sinead Raftery, who is a regional manager in Pieta House, and Sinead is also a psychotherapist as well. Sinead is going to talk to us about how to approach students who you suspect might be self-harming and what to do if a student approaches you about self-harming. So we're really looking forward to hearing those presentations very, very soon. So I just wanted to run through a few housekeeping items, if that's okay. So as attendees, you'll have the opportunity to ask our speakers questions during the webinar. You can just add your question to the Q&A tab that should be at the bottom of your screen. But when both speakers have finished their presentations, we'll look at the questions then and put some of them to our speakers. So we will definitely endeavour to get as many questions answered as possible. So we're so delighted to run this webinar for teachers. I know we have some parents tuning in too, so just to say everyone is welcome. You'll know some of our speakers might be directing some of the content to teachers, as we're running this as part of our Wellbeing in the Classroom week as part of WIMS Live, but it's relevant to parents as well, so you're all very welcome. So I'm going to go ahead and ask our first speaker, Dr. Susan Healy, to get started. As I mentioned, Susan is a consultant child and adolescent psychiatrist in St. Patrick's Mental Health Services. So welcome, Susan. Can I ask you to go ahead and unmute your mic and turn on your camera? There you are.
Hi, good morning, Amanda. Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to get my presentation up firstly. So just bear with me a moment.
Take your time, Susan. These things take a little bit of jiggling around. There you go. You can see your slides.
There we go. I hope everyone can see that. So thanks everybody for joining in. It's a pleasure to talk to you this morning. So I've been asked to speak about understanding self-harm in adolescence. So the points I'll be running through in general is really talking a little bit about the brain development really in adolescence and how that differs from the developed brain in adults, and why that may be different then in terms of adolescence and self-harming. A little bit about definition of self-harm, its etiology, prevalence, and just a few important points also. So some of the slides look busy, but I'll just try and talk generally over some of them as well, just to get some understanding for you. So the teen brain is really still under construction, and the adolescent years are a very rapid phase of brain development. Probably the pre-birth in the womb is a very rapid stage of brain development, and also adolescence. They'd be the two areas in life where there's a huge amount of development taking place. So growth and pruning of synapses, basically all those nerve connections in the brain, and how they develop. A lot of that happens in the adolescent years. And they are dependent on a multitude of factors, really: genetics, genetic predisposition, experience throughout the child's life so far. So some of those brain connections, or synapses as they're called, are exercised by previous experiences that the young person may have had and are strengthened, while others are pruned away. And that may explain why experiences during the child's life in infancy, childhood, and adolescence can increase the risk of mental health illness or protect against it. So a very biological factor in development that can affect the teen brain. Then hormonal influences, exposure to drugs and alcohol, and brain circuitry involved in emotional responses, all are part of brain development in adolescence. So the teenage brain, adolescents differ from adults in the way they behave, solve problems, and make decisions as a general. And they're guided more by an area of the brain that's under a lot of development at that stage of life, called the amygdala. And the amygdala is very involved in emotional responses, in impulsivity. And that's very much under development in the teenage brain. Whereas in the adult brain, it's more developed, and we've learned a lot of ways we respond to emotional circumstances and think about things before we do them, and impulsivity. So a lot of the drive as well in teenage development comes from that area of the brain, the amygdala, that's very, very much under development. So teenage brains are very sensitive to emotional responses, impulsivity, and all of that. So young people are more likely to act on impulse, to misread social cues or emotions because they're still learning, to get into accidents of all kinds, to get involved in things like fights or, again, impulsive acts, or engage in dangerous or risky behavior because they're still learning those learned responses. That's still developing. And they're less likely to think before they act, consider the potential consequences of their actions, or modify their dangerous or inappropriate behaviors. So those couple of slides are really bringing home, I suppose, the difference between teenage brains and adult brains in terms of where they are development-wise. So some normal features of adolescence. Young people can struggle with the sense of who they are, their identity. They may have a preoccupation with appearance, body image. They may have ambivalence over things. Mood swings can be quite common, usually brief, but something to watch if they're more intense or frequent or serious. And young people can have an increased sex drive, obviously, because their bodies are under sexual development as well, and a lot of hormonal changes happening in these years. So therefore, adolescents it's a time of increased risk of poor mental health. 20% of adolescents have psychological disturbances of varying intensity. 10% of adolescents will engage in deliberate self-harm, and 5% of young people will experience a major psychiatric disorder. So we've talked a little bit about kind of the differences in brain development. So a little bit about what is self-harm. So self-harm can take many different forms, and it's difficult to define, and there's a lot of different definitions out there. But I suppose, just to put it into context, it's with self-harm in particular, it's a non-fatal act in which a young person deliberately intends to cause harm to themselves through injury, ingestion of substances, many other different ways that they may harm themselves. So it's an intentional, act, which is different to accidental self-poisoning or something that the young person doesn't intend to do. So self-harm is caused, there are other ways of harming oneself that aren't necessarily necessarily self-harm per se, in terms of young people maybe taking alcohol, recreational drugs, and other ways that they're causing harm to themselves, but it's not per se an intentional act. So I've gone over some of what people may do to harm themselves, and there's just some examples, and there are many different ways this can be done. So some common features of young people who self-harm, they usually have a dislike of themselves in some way, because this is self-harm is something they're doing to try and cope with how they're feeling. It's usually done in a high state of emotion, but not necessarily so. There may be a background of abuse. The young person may be experiencing uncomfortable and distressing emotions such as anger, guilt, sadness, shame, helplessness, depression, despair, and many more. People who self-harm have been described, as using self-harm as a way of dealing with this and trying to manage how they feel. And just to summarize this slide, it talks about, hyperstress and dissociation, just to simplify it. People usually self-harm, from my own experience, they're trying to deal with an emotion they're feeling, which fits into the hyperstress, or they're trying to feel something. And just thinking of an example recently, a young girl I'm seeing at the moment who said she self-harms to feel a physical pain to help compensate for the emotional pain she feels. So young people often describe either trying to feel something in the sense of pain, or trying to move away from an emotion. So this slide and the next just talks about different characteristics that can be more common depending on the age of the young person. So with young people 11 years and under, they may be more prone to self-esteem issues or self-confidence issues, or see themselves based on the opinion of adults in their lives, for example, parents or teachers. And they may be easily distressed or bruised psychologically. Then the 12 to 16-year-old age group, these are quite vulnerable years, as described earlier with brain development and everything. They've commenced usually secondary school. There's a lot of physical, emotional development going on. They're very tuned into peer scrutiny. They're searching for identity through their adolescent years. And there may be, in some cases, bullying or social exclusion affecting this age group, because these are really the secondary, or most of the secondary school age group. And then 16 to 24 years, again, the previous points, but also what can come up in this age group and going into adulthood, then conflict or difficulty in relationships, abuse of substances, a lack of structure, focus, and where they're going in life. They may be quite lonely or have little or no interaction with friends or social interactions. And then identity is forming more through these years, and they may look at themselves both externally and internally, and that can include things like poor body image or self-esteem issues. So there are different factors that young people may be more prone to as they're getting older. Just a little bit about the statistics of self-harm. It's increasingly common in young people and affects about 10% of Irish young people, adolescents. Its annual prevalence around all age groups is about 0.5%. And the highest incident is usually in those aged about 15 years to 19 years. Self-harm is the strongest predictor of repeated self-harm and suicidal behaviour, both fatal and non-fatal. 10% of young people who self-harm will repeat self-harming. 10% of those who repeat self-harming will die by suicide. And the likelihood of dying by suicide increases 50 to 100-fold in with 1 in every 15 dying by suicide within 9 years of the first episode. So this slide is really linking self-harm to repeated self-harm and suicide risk. Less than 12% present for medical attention. So a lot of self-harm happening, and it's not being picked up per se in terms of medically assessed or looking for help. This is just a slide. It's an older slide from 2015, but it looks at the incidence or rate of self-harm in different age groups. So as you can see, age 15 to 19, there's a high peak there, and also 20 to 24. It's kind of climbing slowly from 10 to 14 up to 15 to 19, 20 to 24. And it's only really around 25, 29, 30, 34, that peak comes down a bit. But as you can see, it's prevalent through all the different age ranges. Key warning signs that someone is self-harming, and I do realise there's a talk after this also by Ms. Raftery, so I didn't go too much into it. But people who self-harm often go to great lengths to conceal their injuries, and that's so important to remember. They may try to hide their self-harming. They may seem withdrawn or different, is sometimes something to think about, or low or depressed. Teachers or parents or whoever may notice signs of self-harm, and young people may try to hide these signs. School pupils who may self-harm may look for excuses not to have to wear shorts or short sleeves or attend PE or swimming or anything like that. So just important to keep things in mind like that, and why. And particularly where younger children are concerned, it's important to keep a close eye on especially vulnerable young people, such as those with a history of any type of abuse. So how can self-harm be addressed in school? And again, I won't go too much into this because I know there's a talk after this, but really there should be somebody designated in school to deal with self-injury or things that might come up around that piece. That this might be the same person that's the designated child protection member in the school or not. Sometimes it might be useful, if possible, it depends, to have a male and female staff member that are more designated people to manage that. And every school should aim, if possible, to have a written protocol on how to manage self-injury with young people. So what if help is not sought? About 1 in 3 people who self-harm the first time will harm themselves again. About 3 in 100 people who self-harm over 15 years will eventually complete suicide. So it's really important, I suppose, just thinking back on what might be different with a young person and keeping a close eye on those young people that might be keeping themselves to themselves in particular. So I thought I would talk a little bit about suicide, because it's very difficult to talk about self-harm without bringing this into the talk, because it's so important. Suicide consistently ranks as the leading cause of death for adolescents between 15 to 19 years of age, and it accounts for 30% of deaths in 15 to 24-year age group. So risk factors for completed suicide. Self-harm is the greatest predictor of a future suicide attempt. In general, suicide is more common in the male gender, older age group. I suppose what might be common factors in people who do go on to end their lives, maybe isolation, a psychiatric history, a history of mental illness, including previous self-harm or comorbid or associated mental illnesses. So very important when somebody presents with self-harm to the medical profession, it's very important that a risk assessment is undertaken as part of that to look at their current risks. So what to look out for? a previous attempt, a plan that a young person may talk about or mention something about, the means to carry out a plan, suicidal thinking. Many of these young people are hopeless and feel that, you know, at some stage that there's nothing more that can be done. And that's that sense of hopelessness that they feel. Mental health issues, including depression, signs to look out for, and people at higher risk of suicide. They may, you know, give away possessions. They may write a note. They may give hints that they're thinking of ending their life. So really important to take that into risk assessment. And then obviously, if they're using substances or alcohol, they can increase impulsivity, and often people who use these substances, they're at higher risk of self-harm and ending their lives. What to do if somebody suspects someone is self-harming? Obviously try to talk with them, see what they say, see how much information they can give you if they want help. But it's really important with a young person to tell a designated person and a parent or guardian or whoever is looking after that person, no secrets. And then obviously there's different pathways I'll talk about at the end as to how to help address this. And this can include referrals to different services, including child and adolescent mental health services. Some myths, for example, a young person threatening suicide. This is a myth. It's not really serious about completing suicide. Some people may feel they're using it as a way of getting attention. But the fact is these young people are distressed. They're saying this because they're distressed. Young people who talk about suicide or exhibit suicidal behaviours or self-harm, these are serious suicide risks. And as a teacher, friend, parent, professional, it is better to overestimate the risk of suicide and intervene rather than ignore and minimise these comments or behaviours. The majority of the time, young people who complete suicide have given definite signs or talked about it. The keys to prevention are recognising the warning signs and knowing what to do to help them. All suicide attempts or self-harm must be treated as though the person has an intent to die. Don't ever dismiss a suicide attempt as simply being an attention-gaining device. It is likely the young person has tried to gain attention, and therefore this attention is very, very much needed and may well save their lives. So just some community resources if somebody suspects someone is self-harming. Obviously, I work in the inpatient unit in Willow Grove in St. Patrick's Hospital. So we would see the more acute or severe cases of young people with mental health illnesses. But also the CAMS is the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Services that are based on catchment area that are all over the country. And this is a service where GPs can refer young people with mental health difficulties or a worry about self-harm or suicide risk. Often the first port of call is to attend GP or A&E services if needed or if acute. So GP, A&E, doctor on call, whoever is there that can do an assessment on that young person and refer as appropriate, whether it's to hospital or to CAMS or one of the other services. I've mentioned some services here, different counselling services. And very important to mention Pieta House, and Ms. Raftery is talking after, which does a lot of really helpful work with young people with suicidal thinking or self-harm. The SPACE program is a program that was set up a number of years ago. It was first based in Temple Street Hospital, but it's a program that runs at various times of the year for a few weeks at a time, and it's to help support parents of young people or carers of young people who have thoughts of self-harm, self-harming or suicidal thinking. And a lot of parents who have joined this program find it very useful. From different perspectives, they feel supported by other parents because it's that they seem to carry this for so long, and it's actually a chance to meet or get support from other parents and learn useful ways of how to support their child. Some websites there also. So I had a lot of slides. I talked quite quickly through them, but I only know I had about 10 to 15 minutes. So I hope I kind of gave an overview anyway of the understanding of self-harm and the different aspects in terms of brain development, what young people are going through and how they're trying to manage it, and also to take it seriously as well, you know, is so important. So I'll finish up on that if that's okay, and I'll go on to the next speaker.
Thank you so much, Susan. That was really, really fantastic. I think what you've explained in there would be very helpful to teachers, and what you said about how self-harm can be addressed in schools, having a designated member of staff to deal with self-injury, like you said, particularly in secondary schools, I think it's a brilliant idea. So you never know, some schools might run with that idea, which would be brilliant. A few questions have come in for you, Susan, but we're going to wait until the end to ask you if that's okay. We are stuck for time, so what we'll do is we'll move on to Sinead. We'll hear from Sinead, and then when both speakers are done, we'll put some questions to you then. So we're going to move along to Sinead Raftery. As I mentioned, Sinead is a regional manager in Pieta House, and she is also a psychotherapist as well. So Sinead, whenever you're ready, if you'd like to turn on your mic and your camera, please.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you very much, and lovely to be here with you today. So I'm just going to share my slides, hopefully. Just bear with me one moment. Okay. So as Amanda said, I work in Pieta House and I work as regional manager, but I'm also a psychotherapist. So today I'm going to just go through some tips for teachers around responding to self-harm, and you know what to do then if a disclosure of self-harm is actually made, as well as how you kind of mind yourself in all of this as well, because it's a really stressful situation to have to deal with as a teacher. So, you know, I've such admiration for your profession, because you know a lot of the things that you have to deal with on a daily basis really does fall outside of your scope of teaching, and I know even from you know meeting students through Pieta House that have accessed our service, their teachers play such an important role, because quite often they are the first people that might notice something, or that a student may go and tell. So I suppose what we're advising is, if you suspect your student is self-harming, please take a special interest, because you absolutely can make a tremendous difference to them. And as I said, I see that in Pieta so often, that you know you are the first people that a child may go to. The number one thing to remember is that you should not ignore anything concerning. So, you know, if your gut instinct tells you that there is something going on with a particular student, you know, trust that. You know, you meet these students on a daily basis, so trust your gut. If you feel something is off or isn't right, or something has changed, do trust that. So the staff member, as I said, you may be the first person to notice, and you know, this can be upsetting, can be really difficult to know how to approach a student if you do notice that there's something off, or there's something going on that you just want to check with them. So I suppose the first thing we need to all do when we're approaching a difficult situation is to take a deep breath, because particularly, you know, if you are thinking, God, I need to approach this student, I have concerns of, you know, they may be self-harming, you know, your own anxiety or fear is completely normal. Those feelings are completely normal, because this is a difficult conversation to have, difficult thing to approach. So do just take a moment, take that deep breath, because approaching the student in a calm and non-judgmental manner, where your first goal is just to listen, can be one of the most powerful things you can do, and the greatest gift you can give that student at that stage. So you being in a calm space is going to really have a positive impact on how potentially the conversation will go. So I just want to share Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain briefly with you. So Dan Siegel is a professor of psychiatry, and I just want to invite you for a moment even to do this little exercise with me. So if you want to imagine for a moment, we're going to imagine that the hand is our brain, okay? So this bottom, our wrist and the back of our palm is it's our reptilian brain, okay? So this is where all our automatic functions are done from. So things that we don't want to have to think about on a daily basis, like our heart rate and our blood pressure and our digestion. So this is our control function here for all of those. So it's automatic responses in the brain that keeps us alive. And then I'm just going to invite you to put over your thumb, and Susan has already spoken about this part of our brain, which is the amygdala. So also this is our limbic system in the brain where our big emotions live. And the amygdala is a really important part of our brain because it helps us keep it safe. That's one of its main functions, is to scan for threat and help us keep safe. So if it detects a threat, it's going to send off a response in us to be able to either fight the threat, run away from the threat, or freeze, because that's what we do when we're threatened. So just for a moment, if you reflect on, if you are faced with a situation where you may have thoughts of, God, this is going to be difficult to approach this student and speak about this, or maybe there's an uncomfortableness. Sometimes the amygdala can set off that anxiety responsiveness. So that's why it's good to be able to take a breath and help calm ourselves down before we approach this. And then I just want to invite you to put your fingers over your thumb. So this is this part of our brain here, the cerebral cortex, where our thinking and judgment lies. And I want you to just focus on your fingernails for a moment. That's our prefrontal cortex, where it helps us problem solve, okay? And all this particular part of the brain here is under development as a teenager in particular. And Susan's already spoken about this. Teenage years, there's huge development going on, and this part of the brain is really under development. But so for ourselves, if we're facing a situation that's anxiety provoking, like having a conversation with the student around self-harm, we need to make sure that we're regulated. So this is a regulated brain where the prefrontal cortex is touching the limbic system, and it's also touching our automatic brain response as well, the more primitive brain. But when a threat happens and the amygdala sets off a threat, sometimes what can happen is we can flip our lids, okay? So, our amygdala takes over, our big emotions take over, and our ability to think or problem solve becomes impaired. And this is the same for our students as well. So, this is why it's really important that we help regulate ourselves before we have a conversation like this, but also that we can recognize this in our students, that if we're going to have a conversation, that we do pick the right time and give them a chance to regulate and calm down as well before we have this conversation. So it might be as simple as you taking that deep breath and getting yourself feeling calm, because you're going to be able to mirror that calmness into the student. And remember that calmness is contagious. So if you meet a student and you're regulated, that's going to help them regulate as well. If they're in that flipped the lid stage and the amygdala has took off and the big emotions are flying. Okay, so that's really important. So I suppose let the young person know that you have noticed a difference in their behaviour, and be open about your concerns while remaining calm, non-judgmental and understanding. So an example of how you might approach it, you might say something like, I've noticed that you've become, for example, withdrawn, sad, angry, and I'm wondering if maybe things are difficult for you at the moment. Okay, so you're asking questions and giving the space you're displaying that you genuinely want to hear this answer, okay? If you have an explicit concern around self-harm, move on to more specific questions. So for example, you could say something like, I've also noticed that you've got some scars, or you have been covering up. And I know that sometimes this can be a sign that someone has harmed themselves. Can I ask if you've self-harmed? And again, even using the word self-harm can be important, because you're going to set the scene whereby the student will feel more confident potentially in being able to share it with you, that you've asked the question in a direct way, and that you're able to hear that answer. So then if a student discloses that they've been self-harming, again, the key thing that I'm reinforcing again is just stay calm and non-judgmental. So again, that's going to help regulate the student, and a non-judgmental approach will help build that trust. And we know how important trust is, particularly when we're sharing something maybe that we haven't shared with anybody else. You may be the first person. Reassurance is really important. So reassure the young person that they've done the right thing in telling you, and that you will help get them support, okay? It's important that we do recognize that self-harm is a coping mechanism. So it's important that we don't just advise them to just stop doing it, because the self-harm may be what's helping them cope at that particular time, albeit it's not the coping mechanism that we want for them in the long term. But certainly it might be helping them in the short term. So just stopping might leave them at more risk without putting in another coping mechanism. So follow your students, follow your school policy on self-harm presentations. And if your school does not have a policy, consider developing one. And I know Susan has spoken about this as well. That's really important, because that's going to, it's going to really support you as a team in being able to deal with these types of presentations, which, as I said, can be really difficult and anxiety provoking for you as well. Really important that, we don't keep promises around confidentiality with the young person. And that's really key, because, from a safeguarding protocol perspective, you will need to share that information with the parent or guardian, unless there's a very specific child protection concern. And then obviously you'd need to link in with the duty social worker, but otherwise you will need to have a conversation with the parent and guardian, and be clear with the young person why you are doing this, and give them choices if you can about how you might tell the parent or guardian. So try and make it as collaborative as possible. Again, if you have a policy in the school or that designated person, that can be really key, because again, that's going to support the process as well. So it's a report to a designated member of staff as soon as you become aware of the problem, and inform the pupil also that you're doing this. And then, referral on to another service when you've liaised with the parent. Referral to another service is usually key. The GP is the first port of call, really, that they're best placed to make an onward referral, whether that be to CAMS or Pieta or any other service, and that will support the young person, but GP is key in that. And remember, by showing you care and listening can be some of the most powerful gifts you can give your student at this point. So really remember that. Remaining consistent and supportive will have a huge positive impact on the young person's well-being. And again, I've seen that so much in Pieta, when I meet a young person, the impact their teacher has in the support that they get can be huge, because they spend so much of their time in school as well. It's going to be really helpful when they have that person in school that they feel they can trust. So the impact of self-harm then on other students. So, if somebody is self-harming in a particular class or in school, or a number of people self-harming, monitoring the reactions of other pupils is really, really important, because we know sometimes, self-harm it can affect other students, and there is a piece around contagion as well. So it's really important that we do monitor the reactions of other students. Reassure if a student comes to you with concerns about a friend who is self-harming, reassure them that telling you was the right thing to do and that they've been a good friend by doing this, and offer them the opportunity to speak to the school guidance counsellor. And again, that's really important because it can have an impact on a friend as well. Don't panic. If more than one student is self-harmed, it is important not to panic. As I said, self-harm can be contagious in social groups, but it is really important that we don't go into a panic state. Be vigilant, raise awareness of how students can get help when they are struggling with difficult emotions. Continue to provide support separately or individually for young people who are self-harming. This is safer than raising the issue in a large school group or classes. So sometimes, if a number of students might be self-harming in a school, sometimes we might get a query in about giving a talk specifically around self-harm, and we wouldn't do that. Because that is seen as counterproductive. What you can do in that situation is, as I said, speak to people individually, but maybe put on a talk around resilience and help-seeking behaviour. That would be seen as better practice than going and specifically doing a talk around self-harm, because that can be quite triggering for people that are self-harming or that may have recently stopped. So it's better to do it more from a resilience and help-seeking point of view. So a recap then is around get informed and know the signs of self-harm. I know Susan has outlined some of them. Remain calm and non-judgmental at all times. Just remember that piece around, when you are going into the conversation with a student, regulate it. That's going to help the student regulate as well. Follow your school's policy on self-harm presentations. And again, if your school doesn't have one, really do consider developing one. It really is key in supporting you. Report the matter to a designated key member of staff as soon as you become aware of the problem and inform the pupil you are doing this. Do not make promises you can't keep, such as confidentiality. And again, this can be tricky because it might be the first time that they are sharing it, and they may have anxiety around you sharing it with the parent or guardian or that designated member of staff. But really validate what they've told you and reassure them that you want to get them help, and they've been so brave in telling you this, and that you will be there to support them. Know that you can make a tremendous difference, because you absolutely can. So around your own self-care then, because as I've said, this is difficult. There's nothing easy about any of this. So, recognize that self-harm can be a very difficult and upsetting thing to talk to somebody about. Be honest with yourself and about your own emotions. So, give yourself that time as well, even after the conversation, to check in with yourself. Sadness, shock, fear, disgust, frustration, helplessness can be quite common emotions after having a conversation with the student around self-harm. So, just be compassionate with yourself around that and acknowledge those emotions. Discuss your feelings with a trusted colleague or principal, or seek support, and make sure that you prioritize your own self-care if you feel like you're struggling as well. And it can be good just to discuss your feelings. If you've had a conversation like this, do just check in with somebody you trust and share how you're feeling. Finally, don't blame yourself if you miss the signs of a student who's engaging in self-harm in your classroom. There's no way to see everything that happens all of the time, and know that you're doing your best, and you absolutely are. You're there teaching and educating our young people, and there's all this other layer going on as well. So, you're absolutely doing your absolute best. I just want to share this image with you as well, just around self-care, because just even to take a moment, I know right now I'm sitting beside my phone, and I know I plugged it in last night, and I have a pretty good awareness throughout the day if the battery is going low, and I'll make sure I plug it in and have it charged. And yet our own batteries can be going low, and we totally ignore it, So, before we can help somebody else, we need to be able to help ourselves and have a level of resilience in ourselves as well. So even just, check in on your own battery. And if you do need to do something for yourself just to strengthen your resilience levels, do put that in place for yourself, because you know all of this is difficult, and if you're dealing with these types of situations, you know, really important that you are taking that time to self-care. So finally then, you know, as I said, the GP is the first really port to call for a parent when a child is self-harming, and whether onward, you know, the GP will recommend an onward referral to either CAMHS or other services, ours being one of those services. So in Pieta House, we work in prevention, intervention and postvention. So from a prevention point of view, we have a resilience academy in secondary schools. So it's a 6 module program for second year students, and I'm sure some of you on here today will probably be aware of it. We also have an Amber Flag initiative for national schools, where if they commit to doing 3 mental health initiatives in the year, they can avail of an Amber Flag. And again, this is a great way of kind of building awareness in a school around help-seeking behaviour and building resilience. Our intervention services then, so we provide free one-to-one face video and phone therapy for clients across 20 of our centres. We provide 12 sessions, up to 12 sessions of therapy for people experiencing suicidal thoughts and self-harm. We can add additional sessions if needed, but it's generally 12 sessions. Once a parent once a child accesses our service, we also provide support to the parent. So we provide up to 4 sessions of key support, which is very much a psychoeducational space for the parent and how they can support their child and maybe understanding self-harm. We also provide holdover appointments to anybody that's on our waiting list while they're waiting to be assigned a therapist. So this is a check-in appointment if for example a child is really struggling or an adult is really struggling while they're on their waiting list, they can ring us in and we'll give an emergency check-in appointment while they're waiting to be assigned a therapist. And then from a postvention point of view, so we have a suicide bereavement service as well. So we have 2 aspects to that service. We have a suicide bereavement liaison service, which provides immediate support in the aftermath of a bereavement by suicide to families and communities. So that can be very much, it support sessions, but it can be very much signposting and information for families and communities as well. So then we also provide a suicide bereavement counselling service, and people can access that service anytime 2 months post bereavement. We feel that you know 2 months is kind of a marker for for a person if they do wish to enter therapy at that point rather than support, because if a person comes in too quickly after bereavement, it can interrupt the natural grieving process. So 2 months is the guide there. And for adults in suicide bereavement, we provide 30 sessions. For under 18s, 20 sessions, and for under 12s, 15 sessions. And again, the suicide bereavement therapy is done through face-to-face phone and video therapy. So to make an appointment for assessment in Pieta, we have a national number, and it's 0818 111 126. We also have a 24-hour helpline number, and that helpline is manned by fully qualified psychotherapists 24 hours a day. And we also have a help or a text number which is manned by that team as well. And you can text help to 51444. And again, that 24/7 helpline number, that isn't just for the person in crisis. If a parent or, if you're worried about somebody in your life and you just want to get some advice from a qualified therapist, that number is available as well in that respect. And all Pieta services are completely free. So thank you very much. I'll hand you back to Amanda.
Thank you so much, Sinead. That was brilliant advice. I think teachers are really going to appreciate that, and it'll be very helpful to them. There was some connection issues there, but I think I could hear you clearly. It was just the picture, so I'm sure everyone else could. So that's fine. We're going to ask Susan now to come back on screen as well, and we'll do a little bit of a Q&A session, if that's all right. We have a few questions coming in there via email and the Q&A box. So I'll just jump straight into the questions, if that's okay. So my first question is to Susan. So if a parent approaches a teacher and asks the teacher to keep an eye on their child because they suspect they might be self-harming, what should the teacher do in that example? Because the young person hasn't brought it to the teacher, it's the parent, and they're just suspected, so they're not even sure. What advice would you give to the teacher in that situation?
So personal advice, really, if a parent has brought this to a teacher, okay, so it's brought into light, the risk is brought to light then, and something, you know, cannot be ignored. So I think, you know, the advice around seeking help is really important, and parents to look at that first, you know, collaboratively, but parents to be aware of, you know, going to the GP, or if they feel they need to even to go to A&E, it's not just for physical illnesses. So, you know, to act on the concern, and what have parents done, and finding out maybe a little bit more information around it, and then addressing it with the child, I suppose, it's individual. I think it depends on the situation, but if parents feel that the child may open up to the teacher as well, then it's getting more information on that. And I think Sinead brought up really good, calm ways of doing that and finding the right time. So just trying, I suppose the key is, you know, this risk has been highlighted, how best to act on it, you know, and try to get some intervention as soon as possible, because that risk is there. So it's very individual, but both from the parents' responsibility really to get that professional help. You know, basically attending the GP or making the GP aware ASAP around that. I can't highlight that enough, but what role can the teacher play in that part as well? That might be helpful in that individual situation. Don't know if there's anything else to add to that, but yeah,
absolutely, Susan. Yeah, I would definitely agree, because if the parent has obviously noticed something, so they've got to trust their gut as well, and definitely discussion with the GP would be the first protocol. The teacher can't take on that responsibility. The parent does need to take an action on what they've noticed.
Absolutely, that's the responsibility really of their caregivers. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you so much. Question 2 then is for you, Sinead. So when you were talking about when a student discloses that they are self-harming to a teacher, and that the teacher shouldn't make any promises regarding confidentiality, and the teacher obviously needs to speak to the parent, do they need to let the student know in that very first conversation? Obviously thank them for confiding in them, but at this point we do have to inform your parents.
Yeah, absolutely, because what we don't want is, we don't want the student to be blindsided by this. So where possible, do that collaboratively. Okay, so you know, you might say to the student, you know, can we work together on how I might communicate this to your parents? So try and bring them in on the conversation, but ultimately, you know, you do need to have that conversation with the parents. So, you know, even if there is resistance from the student, you do need, try and bring them with you in it, but you do need to let the parent know this information, you know, and reassure the student why you're doing that, and that you want to get them support, you know.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, that's nice that you're asking the students to be involved in that side of it as well. And Susan, I'll go back to you. I'm just conscious of time. One more question for each of you, if that's okay. So if a student tells a teacher that they're concerned about their friend self-harming, but the teacher hasn't seen anything, they didn't suspect anything themselves, should the teacher do anything at this point? Do they need to approach the student, go directly to the parent, or go to the designated person in the school for self-harm? What should they do?
Yeah, and that's a good question. So if somebody is concerned about somebody self-harming, again, that's risk brought to light and cannot be ignored. So something has to be done. So again, how best to go around it. I think it's really important to let parents know, because this child is going home to their parents or whoever is looking after them, their support system. It's really important that parents are made aware that this is going on. But also, again, having that conversation with the young person, trying to be as open and communicative from the outset as possible. And again, you know, it's probably, depending on the individual and family circumstances, it's probably different for different situations, but definitely parents do need to be made aware. And again, you know, certainly in the unit that I work in, we're really open and honest with young people from the very outset. If there's anything that comes up in terms of risk, it's shared. You know, we try and encourage them to share it with parents too, to have that conversation, which is really awkward, difficult conversation for young people to start having with parents. But it's important they are made aware. And again, you know, advice around, you know, going to the GP or seeking professional help around that. But that your concerns brought up with parents, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Thank you so much, Susan. And then the last question to you, Sinead, is what do you do if a parent doesn't react well to any of this? What should a teacher do if they've brought this to the parent and they just don't react well to it?
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately the parent is the child's caregiver. So I suppose there's two ways. So if a parent just is in a really shocked state of, you know, they can't believe that this has happened, you know, because it can be hugely upsetting to hear that your child has self-harmed, or you're concerned about self-harm, you know. So I suppose given that space to be able to you know, take this information in, but you're very much going in with the piece that, you know, we do need to get help here, you know, and recommending that GP as the first port to call. You know, if it's a piece where, you know, you feel the parent is ignoring this information or dismissing it in some way after you've tried to communicate this concern, you know, well, then there may be a child protection issue, and that's the other extreme part of it. But I suppose it is really about impressing your concerns and really making sure that you're communicating that there does need to be an action on this, that the child does need to be medically reviewed.
Yeah, the important thing is start the conversation.
Start the conversation, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sinead. Again, very conscious of time. It's 12 o'clock now. So that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you so much to Susan and Sinead and all of our attendees for joining us today. If we didn't get to your question, we're very sorry. You can actually send it to us at info@welcomeissues.ie, and then I'm sure our speakers will be happy to answer them over email if that's okay. If you do have any concerns about a student, you can always contact St. Patrick's Mental Health Services support and information line, and we're going to pop the contact number, the contact email into the Q&A box now if you'd like to just take them down. We have also added a link to our feedback survey. If you wouldn't mind filling that in, it'll pop up on the screen as well in a couple of minutes. It'll just take a minute to answer, but it helps us when we're planning webinars like this for the future to get teacher feedback on topics you'd like to see discussed. So as mentioned, this webinar is part of a month-long program of online wellbeing events that we're currently running at the moment called WIMS Live. And if you'd like to see the full schedule of our upcoming webinars, podcasts or wellbeing sessions, just visit welcomeissues.ie. And we do have another webinar next week on mental health support systems, and then we have another one the week after, and that is on no stigma in the community. So if you'd like to attend those, the information is on the website. So for further information, resources or articles and news on upcoming webinars, you can visit welcomeissues.ie. So thanks again for joining us today, and take care.